Salam guys, welcome back to the Mind Over Matter podcast with your hosts Fatma Zaidi and
Fatima Rajabali.
Firstly, we just wanted to say Ramadan Mubarak. We hope the month has been going really well for you so far. Today, we wanted to discuss something a little bit different. We wanted to explore a philosophical question on whether people are inherently good or bad.
Yeah, so we kind of want to discuss whether our nature is one of kindness and empathy, or whether we sort of start life driven by self-interest. So this is a debate that's shaped philosophical and psychological thinking for centuries now. So some argue that humans are naturally compassionate, while others point to human history's darker moments of greed and selfishness, sort of as evidence of our bad side. But is the truth somewhere in between, and maybe our environment plays sort of a larger role in shaping us than we think? So in today's episode, we'll examine both sides of the argument and see what Islam as well as the sciences have to say about this. Should we begin?
So how do we define goodness from a philosophical and psychological perspective? So French philosopher, guys, don't mind my pronunciation here, Jean-Jacques Rousseau suggested that humans are naturally good but corrupted by society. For example, kids don't naturally hate or deceive people, but then obviously you can argue, why do people grow into liars or cheaters or even harm others? Thomas Hobbes, however, suggests that humans are inherently selfish and require structure to behave morally. But again, that's debatable because what society dictates isn't always the right thing. And then Aristotle suggests that virtue is cultivated through habit, so we are born with the capacity for both good and bad. He states, "We are what we repeatedly do. So if someone constantly chooses to be good, they're good, and vice versa."
So just out of curiosity, which one do you feel like aligns the most for you? Or which theory do you feel like is most accurate?
So I think Aristotle is probably the one that I'd go for, because I think our actions do determine who we are. And I totally agree with that quote. So we are what we repeatedly do. If I'm actively trying to do good, then I think I'm a good person.
Yeah, I think basically you're given the opportunity each day to define who you are. But then I also, looking at it now, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, maybe he's kind of onto something, because I do think everyone is born like with a pure soul. And I guess we'll kind of discuss that later when we're talking about Islam and Fitra. So I do kind of agree with him too. I do think we are molded by our society, but maybe we are all born pure.
Yeah. I don't think we all become corrupted by society, but we definitely become influenced by it. So then we have the blank slate theory versus the evolutionary theory in psychology. The blank slate theory suggests that we are born with nothing, shaped only by upbringing and experiences, whereas the evolutionary theory suggests that we are wired for both survival, so self-interest, and cooperation, altruism. During COVID, we saw both panic buying, which reflected people's selfishness, and people volunteering to help others, so showing their selflessness. But I guess the question is, which one is the default? So if we're focusing on inherent nature, I think it'd be interesting to consider the cupboard love theory. So Dollar and Miller posed the idea that babies form attachments not out of love, but because their mother provides food, warmth, and safety for them. So if love begins as a survival mechanism, does that mean we're inherently selfish?
You could also extend this into adulthood and pose the question, do we help others because we genuinely care or because we gain something out of it? So actually there's a pretty interesting study conducted in 2010 that found that babies as young as 7 months old are able to demonstrate an understanding of morality. So in this study, the kids were made to watch a puppet show where different shapes acted in good or bad ways. And afterwards, the babies preferred to play with the helper shape, so the yellow triangle, over the evil blue square. And also there's been other studies that echo this, such as Harvard's Big Mother study, which shows that babies exhibit altruistic behavior, so it suggests that kindness is not simply learned to avoid punishment.
Interestingly, there's research by Yale's Baby Lab which suggests that infants as young as 6 months prefer good characters over bad characters, so it kind of also aligns with what you were saying with the puppet show study, and I guess it shows that it is somewhat inherent, right?
Yeah, like even as children, we are able to decipher what is right and what is wrong, and we have this like innate desire to lean towards goodness.
With regards to the question, do we only do good if there's something in return for us? I'd personally argue true selflessness does exist, because parents sacrifice for their children, Strangers donate organs, even animals help each other with no obvious benefit.
Yeah.
For example, a mother bird spends weeks feeding, protecting, and nurturing her chickens, but when the time comes, she leaves the nest, forcing them to fly. At first, the chicks struggle, they hesitate, I think they even end up flying awkwardly and fall. But if the mother never left in the first place, they would never learn to survive on their own.
No, I do think that's a really good anecdote, because the mother bird is literally gaining nothing from that situation. And if anything, it's kind of like frightening for her, because she is forced to leave her children, but she knows that in doing that, that's the only way that they're going to develop their survival instincts.
And then I guess we can also consider everyday morality. Are we only good when it's convenient, to feel good about ourselves, or when someone's watching? So, for example, we donate to charity, but we also ignore a homeless person on the street. Does that mean we choose goodness only when it's easy? And is it bad to ignore a homeless person, aside from the argument that you don't know how they'll use that money?
So I do understand the concern that maybe by donating money to a homeless person, you're going to enable that cycle if they do choose to purchase drugs, right? But I still think, one, it's wrong to ignore them, and two, there are alternatives. You can offer to buy them some food, and also it's the assumption. I don't think it's right to assume that that's what they're going to spend the money on. And just in general, not even with this example, I think when you do an act of kindness, your only job is to do the act of kindness, not to try and piece together what's going to happen after that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that.
So, I guess moving on to Islam, it would pose that all humans are born with a pure nature, or fitra, which is inclined towards goodness and submission to God. I think, that also links into what we were saying earlier about the kids and some of the different philosophical theories, where everyone is born pure at the point of birth, but then external factors such as the media and society, which is known as primary and secondary socialization in sociology, shapes our ability to act on that goodness.
So, does that mean that someone who chooses not to steal because they're afraid of the consequences, does that mean they're good, or they're just scared?
So I think even though there is an element of that fear there, ultimately they have made
a good decision.
And so maybe it doesn't matter if they've made that choice out of fear, because it's still the right decision.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Yeah, I was literally going to say the same, because it depends, because innamal a'malu bin-niyya, which means that all actions are based according to one's niyyah.
Yeah.
So Islam states that you're not held accountable for having negative thoughts, but only acting upon it.
Yeah, exactly.
But on the contrary, if you think of doing something good, the intention in itself counts, and you're rewarded for it.
Yeah. That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How insane is that? And chances are the guy who thought about stealing was afraid of upsetting God too.
Yeah.
If he's a believer. Alongside people, so surely that's good.
Yeah.
Let's consider this analogy. A knife can be used to cut fruits or to kill a human. The knife in itself isn't good or evil. It's not the tool, but it's how we use it. So I guess the same goes for things like social media, money, or even our own words. Just like our choices, every decision moves us towards goodness or evil.
Yeah. One quote that always sticks with me is, if you watch Harry Potter, I think it's in the 5th movie, there's this scene where Harry is talking to Sirius, and he's like, oh, I just feel so angry all the time. What if it means I'm becoming bad? And then Sirius says, we all have light and darkness inside of us, but
Was that not Dumbledore?
No, it was Sirius. He says we all have good and bad within us, basically, but we're defined by what we choose to act on. So, yes, I do agree. Wise words. So just to wrap up these points, remember that God has given us the tools, such as intellect and our soul, to direct us towards what is good and what is bad, if we ever do sway. So considering that it's Ramadan, one discussion that tends to pop up every year is that of the Ramadan Muslim, and whether the judgment surrounding them is justified. So I guess just to define it for anyone who might not be familiar, Ramadan Muslim refers to someone who practices their faith or intensifies it during this month, but maybe during the rest of the year, they're not really practicing as much. So yeah, there's been a lot of discussion surrounding them and whether they're hypocritical for practicing their faith more during Ramadan. So I guess some people promote this idea of all or nothing, and something that I hear all the time is if someone's not wearing the hijab properly, they just shouldn't wear it at all, which I don't agree with personally, but yeah, so that's what we want to get into. So before we explore the Islamic perspective, I think it would be helpful to discuss the psychology of forming judgments. It's not inherently a negative thing, and it's actually a cognitive reflex and even a survival mechanism, because when we consider our ancestors who had to navigate treacherous landscapes and unpredictable encounters, they had to rely on lightning-fast judgments to determine friend from foe and danger from safety. So if you picture a prehistoric scene, a small group of early humans encountered an unfamiliar creature, and in the blink of an eye, their brains had to assess those threats.
So I guess what you're saying is that forming judgments is a natural process that protects us in many cases.
Yeah, exactly.
And although it isn't inherently negative, there are times where our unconscious judgment may unfairly influence.
Yeah, and I think here it would be really interesting to consider what Islam says about casting judgment. Obviously, we all know that it does place a focus on self-reflection, giving people benefit of the doubt, and we hear all the time, I think it's like, give 70 excuses for a believer. And also just keeping in mind that each person has their own struggles, and there's likely instances where Allah has concealed your flaws, despite Him having knowledge of your weaknesses. So I think we should be sort of granting people the same grace that we would like for ourselves. Yeah.
Obviously, I guess there are exceptions to the point. For example, you might notice your friend doing something out of character, and it's important to be able to gently guide them by example, but obviously with good intention and not in a way that feels arrogant. For example, there is this really famous hadith where this old man is performing wudu, but he's actually doing it incorrectly, and the Prophet's grandsons, Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein, are also there. But instead of humiliating that old man saying, you're doing it wrong, they actually like pretend to role play. So they end up asking the guy, and they're like, which one of us performs our wudu best? Yeah. And then Imam Hassan does it, and then Imam Hussein does it, and then the old man says, wow, you guys are actually doing it better than I am, and I'm the one that's in the wrong. So I guess that just goes to show that you can do it in a way where, like, that old man still had, you know, his respect maintained, his honor was still maintained, but something crucial was changed.
They're still, like, learning from their mistakes, but not in a way that makes them feel humiliated, and also potentially could, like, push them away from practicing at all. So thinking of this in context to Ramadan Muslims, I personally don't feel like it's right to shame anyone, and there are many examples in Islam, such as when we think about Hazrat Hur, who initially tried to oppose Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and then, you know, he had a change of heart at the very last moment.
And can we also, like, emphasize how bad it was that what he was doing? Like, he literally led their whole army, like, he led like their family into battle when, you know, that wasn't the point. Cut off their food, water access. Like, he was, you know, you can say he was a pretty bad guy to begin with, but literally had a complete turnover.
Exactly. So I think that story is such a huge example of repentance, and if someone who is, like, I don't know how to word it, like, if someone who is about to commit something wrong on that huge of a scale is able to have a change of heart at the last moment and is still able to be granted forgiveness, then I think, like, who are we to shame people? Many of us may be struggling with low iman, and we do feel a change of heart during Ramadan, so we should be trying our best to encourage people. Each and every one of us deserves a connection with Allah, and it almost feels like gatekeepy when people shame others for being Ramadan Muslims. Do you know what I mean?
That's a really good point. Didn't think about it like that. Going back to what you're saying about giving advice, I think sometimes harsh words may work on someone, but there's an old Russian saying that the same boiling water that softens the potato will harden the egg. Your harsh words may work on you, but they might not work on everyone. So what's motivating to you may be crippling to another person, and the worst thing you can do is deter someone away because you're making them feel like it's all or nothing.
Yeah, 100%.
And if Islam was all or nothing, none of us would have a chance. So have grace for others and yourself. I came across this quote recently which best puts it, that we live in a society full of sinners, judging other sinners for sinning differently. It's really not our place when we're imperfect ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. On the flip side, though, I do hear a lot of people being like, oh, everyone says we shouldn't judge, but if someone is, like, doing something that's so obviously wrong in front of us, should we not call them out? But then again, I just think you need to have a balance with how you do that, because you can guide someone in a way that doesn't feel discouraging.
I just think it's fine if you do advise someone or you tell them, okay, you can do this or that. But I think when you're like in a TikTok comment section or you're on Instagram, you're just gonna be a keyboard warrior, and you know that you're not. I feel like that is not as genuine as maybe you privately messaging them or I don't know, doing it in the way that we see from the imams.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. Also, I just think we would all benefit from looking inwards first, because we all probably have so many flaws, but we, for some reason, love to focus on other people's. So, to summarize, we've discussed whether people are inherently good or bad, as well as whether judgment towards Ramadan Muslims is justified. So, the reason we introduced both of these topics is because the purpose of Ramadan is to strengthen our fitrah, which is that innate goodness or submission to God that our souls are predisposed to.
And I guess since it's Ramadan, how can we consciously think about improving ourselves? Because nothing changes if nothing changes. So, I think mainly we need to have a shift in mindset. So I guess one of the things that helps me is to not think of your sins as just their numerical value. Some sins are seen as huge, for example, alcohol, while others we excuse, for example, backbiting, because everyone does it. And while sins do weigh differently, there are small sins and big sins, but when we give ourselves that leeway, we normalize that sin. And let's be honest, most of us have probably not drank in our lives, but we've probably been in a goth sesh or two. So the small sins have the capacity to become the size of mountains too.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I do want to ask you though is, let's say you're in a gathering where everyone is backbiting. How do you stop without being cringe and a pick me? Guys,
that's such a good question.
Guys, I can't be a part of this. It's haram.
I don't think you have to say it in that way. I feel like you can just normalize just being quiet. Like, you don't have to say anything.
But then you're listening.
True. And like, are you enabling that behavior by still sitting there?
So I guess we can think about like hadith and stuff as well. I think sometimes I find it difficult because it's literally part of my profession to hear about people's bad experiences. But hadith does tell us what qualifies as backbiting versus what doesn't. So to assess the situation, think about whether you're being mean for no reason, or are you venting because you've been wronged. What you're saying, would you be able to say to this person in front of them? And what sort of language are you using? Because when you're speaking about this person, are you doing it for the sake of a conversation topic, or is it because you're actually looking for a solution to a problem? Because our friends do provide some really good advice, whether we take it or not.
That's a really good point. But even still, I think that's something I struggle with, because like, if you're talking about someone, even if you're just venting because they've wronged you, but that person isn't there, it kind of feels like you're not presenting the story accurately, because they're not there to defend themselves. And also, there is two sides to everything.
Totally.
So even though, sure, like, all emotions are valid, you're justified to vent, I don't know, there's still something that feels icky about it. But I'm also not going to act like we don't all do it. Like, we all vent.
Yeah, totally. But I think what's really important is looking at the language you're using. Because if you start talking about, you know,
like defaming them,
exactly, then I guess that's when you know that you're doing too much. And then you can even say, like, guys, I think we're being a little bit mean here.
So I think another tip we can use to improve our spiritual connection with God in this month, but also all year round, is learning to communicate with Allah, and just knowing that your form of communication doesn't have to just be through dua. So like, as friends, we don't always need a reason to talk. Sometimes we just yap for the sake of it. Like, I remember the other day you voice noted me about a random day you had at work, but we can also have these types of conversations with God, and in fact, that can sometimes be better than talking to your friends or other people, because you know that God isn't going to be judging you. There's no judgment there. And you gave a really good example the other day when you were talking about Prophet Yaqub, who says that he only complains of his grief and suffering to his Lord.
And I know what you're thinking. It might just feel like you're talking to yourself because you don't get this immediate verbal response from God. But communication with God is a lot deeper. Think about when you're venting to a friend. Sometimes you're not looking for advice or a solution. You just want to be heard. With God, you have that space to express anything, knowing that He understands you better than anyone else. The difference is that while you may not hear a direct reply, you'll often find answers in unexpected ways, through a feeling of peace, a shift in your circumstances, or even a verse you came across that speaks to you in the way that you exactly needed. As for judgment, human conversations come with the risk of being misunderstood or criticized. With God, there's no longer that risk. He already knows your intentions, struggles, and weaknesses, yet His mercy remains constant. That's what makes speaking to Him so powerful.
Yeah, I really like that tip, and I think that's one that I will be trying to implement personally. I think something we all struggle with is experiencing a spiritual high during Ramadan and then maybe losing that momentum afterwards. But I think what is helpful is thinking about what was making you feel so good during Ramadan, and it's probably the fact that you were able to build that self-discipline. But having said that, I also think sometimes you can take the emotion out of it. Like, you don't always, like, sometimes building discipline doesn't feel good. Doing the right thing doesn't always feel good, but what's more important is like showing up for yourself and going through the motions, and then I think the goodness comes afterwards. Does that make sense?
Kind of. Where did the emotion part come out of?
As in, it's more important to just have that discipline, not like, I don't think you have to always get satisfaction from what you do.
So you're saying spirituality isn't a feeling?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. But I guess when we're thinking of those highs and lows, we can remember that we don't have to restrict those to the 30 days because Ramadan is supposed to be an ideal way for life. Obviously, you won't be fasting every single day, but you can, I guess you can just take some of those principles and try and apply them to your everyday. I think another thing that I perhaps realized more this year than ever was not seeking knowledge is what's creating a barrier between you and God, and it's preventing you from forming a relationship with him as well. This Ramadan specifically, alongside being on my master's, I've literally realized that I probably know like 0.0001% of Islam, and that's me being incredibly generous, because the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. And so if you have any questions, even if there are doubts regarding religion, please seek them out, because if you're not content with an answer, continue searching, do your due diligence, ask speakers, listen to lectures, read books, look at hadith. There's so much you can do. And even if it means it's not from like your own sect or school of thought, because sometimes you might find that another sect confirms what's in your sect anyway.
Yeah.
What I've also noticed is that when I'm not actively looking, the answers start to reveal themselves as well. Sometimes I'm thinking about something, but I'll find the answer when I like randomly open the Quran, or the same thing will be discussed in a lecture that I attended. I don't know if that's divine timing, but it's crazy for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's important for us to be seeking knowledge at all stages of life.
Another thing that's really important during Ramadan is the emphasis on time. We know that time isn't linear, and this still like boggles my mind to this day. But the cool thing about Ramadan is how beneficial that time is for us. When thinking about the nights of Laylatul Qadr, for example, that one night is better than 1,000 months. Like, hello, if I want to make use of one night in my life, that's probably the one.
Yeah.
There's a hadith which states that 1 hour of reflection is worth 70 years of worship. Just thinking is worship. So what's interesting is you also mentioned the 70 excuses thing earlier, and we find this common number in Arabic, but 70 is just used as a number for like a lot.
Oh, I see. So it's not actually 70.
But it's more. Like like getting to
It's
70
like
is so hard. It's like, yeah, it's like it's almost infinite, right?
Oh, wow.
Because you, like, if you think about it, if you were to give someone excuses, you'd probably be able to, you know, come up with like 7 max.
Yeah.
But 70 is a lot, so just reaching 70 would be so hard, so imagine infinity. I don't know if I explained that. So we often hear the notion, I'm not ready yet for a lot of things. Whilst people may say it's an excuse, we can understand that it can genuinely be hard for people to adopt a certain change. But honestly, no one is ready. Even the hijabi that's been wearing a scarf for 12 years may not be the confident individual she appears on the outside. Push yourself when it feels the worst, because that's the type of worship that pleases God. Despite you struggling, you're trying. Worship isn't about being perfect, it's about showing up even when it's hard. And God says, walk to me and I'll run to you. So when you take those initial steps, even when they're hard, then Allah will make it easier for you.
What you're saying is it's better to push through that and build discipline as opposed to trying to find the ideal moment, which might never arise.
And last but not least, don't despair in the mercy of God. I think we've humanized Allah so much that we forget that there isn't anything that He can't do. Our issues may seem impossible to fix, but nothing's impossible with God. Sometimes, however, when we think this, it's not us actually thinking that God can't do this. We think we're not worthy of His help or His greatness, but we've been told to never despair in His mercy. In chapter 39, verse 53, He says, O my servants who have transgressed against themselves, do not despair of the mercy of Allah. Allah literally says you could be the worst of sinners, but if you sincerely repent, then I'll be there. Like I mentioned earlier, He says, walk to me and I'll run to you.
And that applies both to the idea of Ramadan Muslim, but also being inherently good. So if we redefine what it means to be Ramadan Muslim as not someone who's a hypocrite, but someone who's actively trying, which we all are, we're all looking to improve. And we're looking to improve because God has instilled that goodness within us. So how can we not be good and become the best version of ourselves? Was that you trying to clap?
So I guess that's pretty much the end of our discussion today. We initially started off with talking about whether people are inherently good or bad, and I guess we came to the conclusion that Islamically, all humans are born with innate goodness.
Yes.
Our experiences and upbringing may slightly change that, but we all have the potential to return from our birth to our death.
Yes. But also we're defined by the choices we make each day. Like, do you want to be good or do you want to be bad? Even though I don't know if I like those terms.
But as in, it's you know not what black I mean. And white like that.
Exactly.
But I guess focusing on Ramadan and the notion of the Ramadan Muslim as being someone who's just doing it for the month and then going back to their old ways, if we redefine that, like you said, and realize that we are all Ramadan Muslims who are trying to become that type of Muslim for the rest of the year and for the rest of our lives, then hopefully we can try and implement those changes and become a better version of ourselves.
Yes, exactly.
Also, I'm going to try not to cry here. But before we end today's episode, we had a bit of an announcement to make.
Which is...
Do you want to say it?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, guys. I'm getting married, which means I'll be moving to London, which I'm really excited about. But unfortunately, it might just mean that the episodes will be a little bit more drawn out, at least just for the first few months while I'm getting settled. But inshallah, we do have a guest episode in the works that we want to record soon before I leave.
Yep. Also, everyone remember Fatima in your prayers.
Yes,
and
please.
Hope everything goes well, and I can't wait for all the events that are to come. Thank you so much for listening, guys. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe if you're listening on YouTube, Spotify, download the episode, Apple Podcasts, download the episode. And I think that's literally everything for today.
Yes, so we'll see you next time.